Good morning, George, or rather, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Kate. Lovely to see you again.
Yes, it's I think last time I had you on here chatting with us, we had a panel of men talking about their experiences of being a man in the healing arts.
Yes.
And yeah, and you're back for a good reason. You shared a lot of really interesting perspectives with us last time. So welcome to Men's Health Week. We're on day 5.
Yes.
Yes, we had a men's table, and we've got a few more people to interview. But it's beginning to create this beautiful whole picture of what it is to be a man in the healing arts, and it's quite interesting for us, all of us who are listening in as non-men, just to know what men experience and go through a little more.
Well, I only know my experience as a man.
That's why you're
That's right. Well, thank you
here.
for the opportunity to speak with you again, and to SoulAdvisor for creating this space.
You know what? Together we'll all get there, won't we? And I think being able to represent the various bits and pieces of our community is so important. Now, again, actually, since the last time we talked, we're slightly over 10% of our community is men. Last time it was just under. So it would be really great if we had 50-50 like the real world.
Well, you can only strive towards that particular pathway, but it's interesting from my understanding of personality traits. If you allow things to happen in a particular way without obstruction, women or females tend to be a little bit more caring than males in the agreeableness scenario, and tends to do a little bit more on the caring jobs rather than the males doing more on the playing around with the gadgety type things. I mean, it's not a universal thing, but there's that tendency to go that way.
There is that tendency, and I am continually interested to know whether that is nurture versus nature. Do we just start that way, or is that something that our community brings in to bear? I always think to myself that it might be nature, and the reason that I think that it might be nature is because in Samoa they've got this third class or third gender, which is to be gay, and
Yeah.
I can't remember the name. I want to say Talofa, but I don't know. Anyway, it's a third sex, and those men are the third boy to be born into a family is brought up as a woman, knowing the female arts and dressing as a female, etc., etc. And those are the people that they choose to take on positions of community responsibility and government, because those people have a foot in both camps, so they can represent both sides. And we're looking at a situation where it's actually you're brought up to adopt a certain role, and I wonder how much that might be true for me as a woman, you as a man. Question mark.
I was listening to someone talk about personality traits, and they were saying in the Scandinavian countries where the opportunity for equal opportunity is higher there, then males tended to go towards a little bit more male-dominated industries, and females went to more the caring industries, which is interesting in itself, because I didn't know much about my own personality trait, and I did the Big 5 personality trait questionnaire. And it just, from my understanding, I'm not a personality trait, psychologist by any means. I'm more in the natural therapies and Chinese medicine, but the Big 5 is sort of agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, and open to experience. And agreeableness was my highest trait compared to all the other ones. And agreeableness, according to this personality trait psychologist, is one of those evolutionary traits that is useful for maternal care. Because when you have a newborn baby, you have to be very agreeable. Because if you're very disagreeable, it's going to be a bit challenging for both parties per se.
Yeah,
so I thought that was quite interesting in that in that context, which then explains some of my personality aspects, because when I was younger, I wanted to actually do nursing, which was not a very male dominating role, but I just had this tendency to want to care for people. And it was my mother, and I'm saying thank you, Mum, not to steer me away from nursing, but to introduce me to natural therapies. It was the actual, when I finished, it was HSC at that point in time, but I failed HSC the first time. Then I went back the second time and I passed it, but not enough to actually go into any university or TAFE or college at the time. But the Alfred Hospital were still doing nursing training. And when I went for the interview and they assessed me per se, the female panel there, one of the panelists said that, people with low HSC marks don't make good nurses. And I'm going, exactly, look at that face that I'm seeing on you, and thinking, geez, I was like 19 at the time, 18, 19. And I was so grateful to my mum that she actually introduced me to natural therapy. So I was halfway through the first year of a naturopathic course in Melbourne. And it was probably the best decision, that being very agreeable, that I took on board and say, okay, I'm going to keep going. And I'm here today speaking to you.
Yeah, that's just amazing that you were so drawn into that field of endeavor, looking after people, isn't it? And, it's like it's preordained almost.
Well, and the interest, I find it, because I find another interesting part here is that my father passed away when I was 10. So it was predominantly my mother, and it was my mother that observed the traits within me. And then it was she that found the naturopathic course that, and being a Greek mother, without the stereotypic aspect, that was quite, quite forward thinking of her back in 1987, 89, I think, 88, 89, somewhere there. That was pretty progressive.
I grew up surrounded by Greeks too, because I grew up in Greece and then came back here, and that was very unusual for her to choose something that wasn't a lawyer or a doctor and then shame you.
Yeah, exactly. So again, very grateful to her for guiding me down this particular. Yeah, I know. I'm thanking her. Thank you, Mum.
And how satisfied have you been with your career choice since then? Because you've done so much training. I remember preparing your bio for SoulAdvisor, and I could not believe how many different modalities you had explored and become qualified in.
Yes, well, I've enjoyed. It's a bit of one of those juxtapositions. I say juxta because I want to practice and want to help people, but some of my experiences in the past created this not feeling good enough sort of talk in the background. So I never ever felt good enough just to stop at one thing. So I'd go on to the next thing. So I started off with natural therapies. And I finished naturopathy, but within that, I finished the massage course too. So I happened to be good with my hands, and people were attracted to the treatment that I was doing. But then when I finished my naturopathic diploma, I said, oh, it's a diploma, not a degree. Maybe I'll find something. And I ended up going and doing a health promotion degree.
Yeah, and you had that in your HSC. So isn't that amazing? Like you hadn't done well in your HSC, but a health promotion degree is not to be sniffed at. Like that takes a lot of.
I've experienced like I was only looking at my HSC certificate the other day, and it was like a 12, an 18, a 25, and a 38, and a 49. Okay. And then I transcended that with a health promotion degree. I pretty much got HDs all along, apart from 3 distinctions. And then when I went and I did my master's degree, I finished that with all HDs except for one distinction. And my undergraduate in Chinese medicine, I ended up getting at the top of the class, equal top with another practitioner or another student who happened to be also studying medicine at the time too. So
I just love what you're saying. I think for me, the same thing has happened. I've madly swung between A pluses and Ds in my life, madly. And it's always when I'm really inspired and I can see what I'm actually doing that I just top it all, like, and flourish. And I feel like, like that whole vision that you had of yourself as a healer, where you could see you were doing something that was towards that end, probably was very therapeutic. Like at school, it's such a linear process, or was. Maybe it's getting better, but when I went through, and perhaps when you went through,
yes,
it was very, very linear. And, there was the doctor and the lawyer up the top, and that's where you were headed or not. And if you didn't, then you were down here, down the pile.
Well, school is a very interesting, the way that we structure it, because who's at the top? And that's at the expense of everyone else. So it's, if you're down here, regardless of why you're down there, you already look down at not being good. And I was down there quite a lot through the high school type of time. And interestingly, even with the Greek culture, you lose your dad, all of a sudden, your mother's called a hira, like a widower. And it's like, there's the single female there. She's going to be trouble. And, you remember, going to Greek type of events, and then eventually that sort of disappeared. And as a kid, you go, well, what's happening there? So the way that things get fostered per se, well,
it's hard to describe, isn't it? Why? Yeah.
But in the context of the personality trait understanding, that sort of, rather than becoming rebellious per se, it created a different pathway. And not having a father at one level and having a mother, well, having both, in the context of not growing up with the father, even though I didn't have that masculine energy there as the male, which has its own limitations too, because then that also impacts on then how I see myself, not having that particular male role model there, albeit my mum did an amazing job taking on both roles. So I saw the female working, and having to deal in a very, particularly back in the 70s or 80s, and quite challenging times. If you're a female and you're like, you were,
I think,
type of thing. But we can't confuse exploitation with masculinity, because there are individuals that will exploit, and that's just not kosher. But if that individual's a male who's doing the exploitation, we can't generalize that all males are exploiting people, because a whole heap of young children get exploited by both male and female because they're smaller than you. Because I've come across some females that I'm going, oh my goodness. So
interesting what you're saying. I really, really, when I grew up in Greece, which was the 70s, then, it was, if you were a hira, is that right?
Hira, yeah.
If you were a hira, then you had to wear black for the rest of your life if your husband died, whereas the men had to wear a black armband for 5 years if their wife died. And it was a terribly imbalanced society. But, I've been back to Greece many times since I grew up there, and it's gone. And so
we say we say we're more Greek here than what they are in Greece, because the generation that came here held on to those traditions so tightly to be able to, but then they moved on.
Yeah, they did. And I don't think it was Greece alone. Like, we've all discussed what a patriarchal society we're moving through at the moment, and hopefully coming into some saner kind of world. So that society has been shaped like this. And, we've always had somebody at the top, and then all the people that were below that. So it might have been a headmaster or a business owner, or it might have been the prime minister, or it might have been what have you, the guru. And in most cases, that was male, of course, up until fairly recently. But it's a terribly uncomfortable position to be in, you know, as a male or as a person up, anybody up the top, really, because you're very vulnerable, you know. Down here, you've got all that ballast and you're closer to the ground. But if everybody's looking up to you and telling you that, oh, you're amazing, it's a very, very imbalancing position to be in. And you know, we talked previously in the week about the fact that men die earlier in this world than women do. And did that have anything to do with having to take a lion's share of the responsibility and blame and shame as well, but by being up in those positions? I'm not sure. Why do men?
I suppose it depends on the type of person at the top. You know, there have been both males and females at the top that are genuinely doing what they're doing to improve everyone around them. But there have been people that are doing it for the complete opposite reason. So, you know, many people have died across the world because of ideologies rather than masculinity.
Yes.
So I think a person's ideology and how fixated one becomes with that, then we lose connection with humanity, because, you know, we're the only creature on this planet that are called beings. We're human beings, regardless of, we've got genitalia that distinguishes one human being from another generally. And they're necessary for procreation, because without them, if we didn't have technology to be able to take sperm, that has to come from somewhere. It's not going to come from the female variety, but you've got to get the ovum and bring them together. Now, whether you do that from human to human or in a petri dish, well, maybe with the it's in my mind just gone off in the context of, you know, there's about 380,000 births that are happening live every day, yet there's only about 178,000 deaths that are occurring. So if you were earning, there was a Google fact that I was looking up the other day. It's like, so if you're earning $170,000 but spending 380,000,
yes,
how quickly will you get into trouble?
Yes, I think we can agree we're in trouble.
Well, and that's, you know, that's an interesting. It's what the United Nations, the desertification, I think it's that particular group are predicting that by 2045 we'll have 9 billion people on the earth, but our agricultural production of food drops by 40%. You have to stop and think about that for a moment, because you know, when 2022, right now, maybe they're a bit outside by 20 years, or who knows, but, you know, say in another 60 years, you know, I personally won't be here. Maybe I'll hit 100, who knows, but my son will potentially be here, but it's his unborn children if he decides. So that's a generation of unborn children that's going to have a bit of an issue. So this is
fascinating, George, what you're talking about. And I just give thanks that there are so many people in the healing professions, because healing doesn't stop with healing myself or yourself or the people that we treat. It has to continue on to our ecosystem, because there is absolutely no point being well in a void of mayhem and desertification, you know.
Well, when people start going hungry and famine hits, well, our humanity goes out the door. That's, I mean, we don't have to go that far back in history to see that that's already happened. So it's being open to the sorry.
I feel like, you know, like what we're talking about here on a wider picture is what it is to be caring and sharing, and you know, it's not a female, it isn't owned entirely by women, you know, although we have this much bigger representation in the healing arts, and men find other ways perhaps to be sharing and caring. But like, I think there has been for many, many men, and lots of the structures that men in a patriarchy have produced, a real tendency to block off Mother Earth, or not feel, not go into that caring and sharing attitude towards what we should be custodians for. Yeah.
It's an interesting comment, because listening to you, was it yesterday you had, I've just forgotten his name, sorry.
Chris Cook.
Chris,
no.
yes. Yeah, Chris Cook. And he was sharing that he spent, 15 years with his grandfather.
Yeah.
Learning about the earth.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, well, it's what you're saying is semi-true at some levels, but not true across the board, because here's a guy that had a grandfather that took him and showed him a whole thing about the earth and how to look after the earth. So the indigenous population, the context of connection, there was a connection there because that was their environment and they needed to learn. When I look out my window, I'm seeing a building, footpaths, asphalt and cars. I've got to learn to be able to navigate that particular scenario. So what they're doing to try and get people or young people back into connection, because the connection to, when we talk about connections, is we've lost connection essentially within ourselves to recognizing in this moment is imminent. Between where we are right now, where it's imminent, and we have a choice right now to either experience our imminent moment pleasantly or unpleasantly. And people have lost that connection to making that choice. That's from the Viktor Frankl's quote. Everything can be taken away from a man or person except one thing, the last of the human freedoms, our capacity or ability to choose how we respond in any given situation. And
I love
this
that.
this moment is where we need to choose within ourselves to experience life pleasantly, because when we're doing that, then if I start, do you like me to be pleasant towards you or unpleasant towards you?
Pleasant, please.
Yes, of course. And I'd like you to be pleasant towards me. So if we're both taking responsibility in this moment to choose to feel pleasant within ourselves, so then we're more likely to act pleasantly to our surroundings, to ourselves. And then we have more energy within ourselves. We're better able to do things that are more humanitarian in nature and less destructive.
Exactly. It starts here, doesn't it? In our building blocks, and our, each of us has the potential to be a custodian, but that only happens when we're healed. And the finest state of healing is when every moment we have gratitude and understand that we're living in the moment and make the choice to respond to that positively. So that is the healed state. It really, really is. So if we were all there, then we would have the energy and the capacity to look after those around us and everything else around us too. But until we get to that point where we're actually feeling whole, then it's very hard for us to engender wholeness. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting because it then comes back to what is being whole.
Question.
Because we're looking a lot on the outside of us to make us feel good. If you're pleasant towards me, then I feel good. If I'm pleasant towards you, then you feel good. If I start being, aggressive or whatever it is, then based on your experience, will reflect on how you then make that mean. Being the patriotic, the real, aggressive, or what the hell are you on, George? Type of thing. So your experience, which then keeps running in the background, will then influence or filter how you then interpret what's happening in this imminent moment. When we're working, like I don't have any experience, like I didn't have a grandfather or a father from the age of 10. So some of those male dominating roles of going fishing or in inverted commas or, fixing up a car or doing the those things or being a bit rougher on a footy field, that wasn't part of my experience, but then part of my personality, it suited.
Yes.
If I was complete opposite, I don't think then my mum would know how to handle me. Because she wouldn't have had the masculine aspect dominating to deal with an aggressive, or sort of a, because it took don't know what happened then. Sorry. It took what Chris was saying, like until 30 to become a man. But that was even having a grandfather and
Yes.
also having those particular structures there. So it comes back, to I keep sharing the idea that it comes back to babyhood. After reading a book by Sue Gerhardt, that she wrote a book, Why Love Matters, How Love Shapes a Baby's Brain. And the first 3 years of life matters. And we underplay, or we don't take on board the importance of those first 3 years, because the first 3 to 5 years, because for a little newborn baby, they are completely useless. They cannot do anything. And they're reliant on their environment to shape them. How do we end up with a suicide bomber versus a saintly person?
Oh, wouldn't it be great
it's like
between those two very strong extremes, we all tended towards the saintly person. And I hope and pray that everything that we're doing here in our personal lives and as a community of SoulAdvisor helps us to move that way. This evening, we've got another talk by a panel actually run by the Australian Breathworkers Association at 5 p.m. happening on this same platform. And that is all about connecting and how important connecting is, which is exactly what you're talking about. And I don't think that, it's inherently negative to be a bloke creating a society that impacts badly. I think we've just all lost our way. There's toxic femininity, there's toxic masculinity, and there's the healthy versions, which we should be really proud of when we start to embody. So let's hope we can all move that way.
Yeah, and I totally agree. It's being able to acknowledge and, if I use the word, reward healthy behavior rather than get stuck in the negative aspect of it. And the context of connecting, again, I could keep talking for a long period of time, but
2 minutes and 43 seconds
to go. Yeah. Because one of the things, talking about connection, one of the things that I found in clinic, that people forget that they need to connect with Mother Earth. The electrons from we haven't evolved separate from the Earth's surface. And what people underappreciate is, in the scientific literature, the electrons from the Earth are negatively charged particles that deactivate free radicals. You and I, as we're sitting here, are you earthed right now?
I am absolutely. Yes.
Are you earthed? Have you got an earthing mat?
I don't, but I've been walking barefoot this morning on the grass and put my feet in the water. Yeah.
But you were earthed at that point in time, but not now. Because what's going through us now are electromagnetic frequencies. That we're 3G, 4G, 5G, radio waves, TV waves, Wi-Fi signals. It's permeating through us. And as it's going through us, do you think it's doing nothing? Or they go, oh, that's Kate, that's George, we'll go around you. They're going through us. And as they're going through us, they're generating free radicals and creating oxidative stress. So unless we're actually eating a whole heap of vegetable matter, antioxidants, without the earthing, that's our ally, and we forget to earth ourselves. You got to do it at least 24/7. It's impossible unless
I love the fact that you've always stood for that. And I feel, our little tagline at SoulAdvisor, which is nourish yourself, heal our world, starts there, connecting to the earth in whatever way you can do that, taking the shoes off, swimming, earthing mats, if you can't, if you're 3 stories.
I'm earthed as we're speaking, because I know I've got all this. I'm sitting on one, and so I know that I'm bringing the electrons of the earth inwards to me to be able to counter the things that we can't see, which is the electromagnetic frequencies and the stressors that are in the background and whatever in in our environment that we can't see, to counter it.
Another great way to earth is to connect. So this is Hoshi.
That's it. Well, that helps to reduce stress. By reducing stress, you reduce your free radical component. So you're connecting in that way, but you're not bringing up the electrons from the earth until you go in contact with the earth. So when you play with your doggy outside, take your shoes off and do it. And then you're connecting and earthing and breathe at the same time, and you get some sunlight. So you get a whole heap of things mutually reinforcing to improve what this body needs. The body needs it.
The body needs it. Well, George, it's been an absolute joy, and you always have great messages, and I love hearing your perspective on everything.
Well, thank you again. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity. Yes.
Well, let's keep talking about whatever else comes up, and just to let our viewers know also that we're steaming towards creating a men's table where men will be able to talk about what it is to be a health therapist. So that will be an interesting thing that we're developing too. But until then, thank you so much for being here, and have a beautiful day down there in Melbourne.
And likewise. Okay.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.